Hello and welcome back to another video. So today we're going to build a tool. So we're going to build some clamps. Now these clamps here are scissor type clamps. So they have a pivot point here and the jaws are down this end. They have a lead screw that goes through here. There's a left hand and a right hand thread. So you turn the lead screw one way and your jaws will open out, and then you turn it the other way and they will close back together. So these clamps here are actually made by a company called Dimide, and I haven't actually found anyone on YouTube who have sort of done some homemade versions of these clamps. So I thought I'd have a go at making some, and these are very strong clamps from what I've seen on the YouTube videos that people have done reviews on them, and I think they'll be a good addition to the workshop. So the clamps are kind of like compression clamps, so there's no moving parts down this end when you're clamping, which is really good. So if you had something like a G clamp or a C clamp, when you're turning that screw to tighten up your work, sometimes even though the end is a swivel end, it can actually start moving your work. These clamps are very good. They're a little bit like a can't twist clamp, where they actually just squash together. There's no lead screw at this end turning or anything like that. So very useful. Now Dimide make a couple of different series here. They have the HD series number 5. So what it means is it's 5 inches when it's fully open, so 127 millimeters. And they also have the quarter series number 5. So the quarter series is a lighter duty clamp, and you can see that the lead screw in this case is, well, I don't know what the official sizes are, but this looks kind of like about a 12 millimeter lead screw, whereas the one on this one here, the heavy duty clamp, is around about a 16 millimeter lead screw. What you don't see in these printouts here, because to get them on the page, I've chopped the top off here, but there is actually a hexagon at the top here so that you can connect it to your impact driver to close and open the clamp, and that's typically the case for, I think, all their clamps can do that. At the other end there's a couple of options. So you can see on the heavy duty clamp there's a piece of metal and it's got a hole through it, and then it has this handle, and this handle has a ball detent, so you can actually just slide it out and leave it out while you're using your impact driver at this end. So you can actually use impact driver or do it manually. And I've seen another design where they have like a square recess in the bottom here, and then they have a hand nut type thing that has a square on it, and that pushes into the bottom, and you can just turn it around by hand, and then when you're finished you can pull that piece out again. So a couple of different designs that they have. So for me in the workshop here, I think the the lighter duty clamp will be sufficient for the work that I'm doing. It's a little bit hard to tell because these pictures are a lot larger here and a lot smaller here, but the distance from here to here is almost the same from here to here, so you can see that this is a much more beefier type clamp. I'm not sure of what size steel plates they have on here, what gauge, but I'll have to see what I've got in terms of stock here, and I'm thinking probably 5 millimeter, which I think is 5/16 of an inch, plates that I'll make up. In terms of the build, I think it's pretty straightforward really. These plates, there's one on this side, one on the other side, and also down the bottom, so you'd make 4 plates. You could cut your material out and then tack them together and do your final shaping. That's probably how we'd do it, and then we'll drill the holes all in exactly the same place. They just look like the same piece for each area, so all the holes will be in the same place. So that's how we'll do all that, just to make sure that everything lines up properly. They have these are sort of lugs that pop through, but there's a separator holding these plates apart So there's one there, and of course on the bottom clamps as well. I'm not sure what we'll do there on our one. I think I might actually have some sort of separator in here, but I'll have it threaded and I'll have a hole in the plate and I can just bolt it in there somehow. We'll come to that once we get there. So I think that sort of covers, an overview of the clamps, and we'll see what sort of stock I got available, and we'll start making some of these Dimide style clamps. Okay, so I've just drawn a mock-up of the shape. This is not to scale, but just working out the measurements of the steel I'm going to need to make these. It looks like the height is 110 millimeters, or 4 inches and 21/64, and the length I'm going to need is 210 millimeters, or 8 inches and 17/64. So I'll go and have a look and see what I have in stock for that. Okay, the bad news is I don't have any 5mm plate that's gonna be wide enough to make these pieces. The good news is I do have some 6mm plate. That's about a 1/4 inch. So I can use that, that's fine. So I think the approach here will be to draw the template out on this piece of 1.2mm just sheet metal, and then I can cut it out and get it where I want it, to rough design, and then I can trace around that template onto the 6mm steel plate to make these parts. Right, so I've got the basic shape cut out in this 1.2mm just panel steel, and that will be our template for marking out the 6mm plate that I'm going to be using. So what I'll do is I'll cut out the 4 pieces, and then I'm going to stack them on top of each other and tack them together, and then I'll actually go around the edge and make it all even for all of them. Then I need to drill some holes. So we've got the hinge down at this end, and then we've got the lead screw nut assembly that will pop through this hole, and then we have the jaw down at this end. And just looking at the pictures from the internet, there's another hole here, and there's a couple of holes here. Not really sure what those are for, but they're not on both clamps. They're not on the heavy duty clamp. The 2 holes here are only on the light duty clamp. And then there's a bit of bracing and the separator that goes around here somewhere to keep the 2 plates apart and to provide some support, for twisting and that type of thing. So I'll get into cutting the other bits out, and we'll tack them all together and clean them all up, and then we'll be ready to drill those holes in them. Okay, so I've got the shapes cut out roughly. A little bit hard on these inside edges here with the angle grinder. But I'm going to take them over to the belt grinder and just tidy them up a little bit, and then I'll tack them all together and then give them a final clean up. Okay, so I got the grinding done and that came out pretty good. It's all nicely ground up and all these four pieces will be all the same. So the next step now is to sort of lay out where we need to drill our holes. At the back here, this is the hinge end, and we've got the jaw end up here, and of course there's the lead screw hole here. And I did notice on some of the screenshots of the Dimide clamp, there's another hole down here, and I believe it's so that you can change out your jaw that you've got to some other jaws, and some of the other jaws may need two holes, or maybe it's a jaw that's kind of larger that needs to be set down lower. So there's two holes here, and we'll sort of put two in this one as well, I think. There were a couple of other holes on the diagram that were here and here, and I'm not really sure what they're for. So at this point, I'm going to not actually drill any here unless I find something else on the internet, you know, a good reason why they're there. So I'm going to use either 10mm bolts or 8mm bolts for these parts here, just so that they're, you know, got a bit of meat there and it's strong enough. Now, although I was making the, you know, the less heavy duty clamp, I think the 6mm steel plates here, or 1/4 inch steel plates, are quite strong. So, I mean, this could be a sturdy, you know, heavy duty one. And I think the only difference here would be the size of the holes I have here, and for the hinge, and also the lead screw. So if I put about a 16mm lead screw in here and have these maybe at 10mm or maybe even 8mm enough, you know, this will be a very sturdy and I think a heavy duty clamp. So anyway, let's get this marked out and then we can get some holes drilled. So just before we drill these holes in here, I want to mark out the shape on this other piece of steel. So this will be the second clamp. So if I mark it out now, then I'll have that ready to cut out later, and I'll do the second clamp parallel with this one, but I'll just do it off camera. You know, you've already seen what I've done so far to this one, so there's no need to watch all that stuff again. Okay, so I've got the bits all separated and cleaned up. You saw it was a little bit hard to get them apart there. I probably tacked them a little too good, I think. Anyway, I got them separated and cleaned up, you know, where the chisel had sort of gone in there. So the plates are practically finished. So the next steps will be making up the pedestals, and you would have seen I've put a couple of extra holes in here. and this is for the separators to hold these pieces apart. So I was thinking of just making a rectangle block in here, but then I was thinking an easier way was probably to use a bit of 20mm round stock and just drill a hole right down the center and tap it for probably M6, and then I'll just put some M6 bolts in there to hold it all together. I think that would be the easiest way, and it will just, line up very easy instead of trying to machine up a square block or rectangle block and then trying to get the holes in the right place. Then there will be a separator on this pivot point here as well, between the inside pier. So that would be probably around about 26mm. And then I'll make up the nuts that go up here and down here. And I was doing a bit of measuring last night, and I'm going to have to use a bit of 32mm round stock, because if I'm putting in the M16 thread, I need a bit of extra meat there for it. So that's what I'll do for these two nuts. And of course, one's going to be a left-handed thread and one's going to be a right-handed thread. And then once we've got those bits all done, then I'll be able to sort of get it assembled in a way, and then work out what we do with the jaw blocks at the front here and what we're going to use for that. So I've tried to make a mock-up of how this is all going to go together, and I've done a bit of a drawing here as well. So basically, this drawing, this bolt here that goes through is representing this bolt here, and there will be a spacer in between here to hold these plates apart. The holes through here and here are where these pieces go. So these are the lead screw nuts, and they have a right and left hand thread. And we've also got some spaces here and here. So they're not actually on the drawing here, although I do put one at the top here because we have them up the top here as well, and up the top at the bottom end. So in terms of dimensions, the narrow part here is 26mm apart. So the spaces I'll be making there are 4 round spaces at 26mm long. At the other end, the wider jaw, that's 36mm long. So I'll be making 4 of these longer spaces at 36mm to keep those jaws apart at that distance. So that means that this nut is going to be narrower than the nut down the bottom here. And also what I mentioned before is these nuts that I'm going to make up, they're 32mm wide round stock. And these threads here, although they're drawn like this on the plan, they will line up together for the one solid lead screw to go through both of those threads and keep those in line. So I've got all these spacers all turned down to the right size and the right length, and they've also been threaded in there as well. So that's all good. For this one here, I tapped all the way through, but this one is a little bit longer because it's the wider jaw, and the tap wasn't long enough, so I sort of tapped halfway through each end. So that should be okay. The bolts here are cut short enough to not go into the other thread from the other side. I've also made up a spacer for the bolt that goes through this hinge area here. So I'll get these plates all put together and then we'll see how it looks after that. Right, so that's starting to look like a clamp now. That's working really good. Spaces are all good and just eases in here up at the end here. So, I mean, that's not going to go past there anyway because the jaws that get put in here will butt up against each other when this is closed up. So the next part I need to make is the lead screw. So it's a bit of 16mm bar like this, and it will go through the center like that, and we'll have a couple of nuts here. So one of these nuts will be a left-handed thread and one will be a right. I'm not sure which way or which one will be which at this stage, but I'll work that out, and then I'll make up those nuts. And once I've got the nuts made up, then I'll make up the lead screw. Now I've actually got a 16mm left-hand thread. I think it's about a 1.5 pitch. So that's going to be okay for making one of the nuts. But for the lead screw, I don't actually have a die, a left-handed die for 16mm. So I'm going to have to probably turn this up on the lathe and cut the threads on the lathe there. Now that's something I haven't done before, so it's going to be, you know, a first for me. So we'll see how that turns out. But I think the plan will be to do the nut, the left-handed nut, and then cut the left-handed thread where I need it. And then if that all works out fine, then we can carry on and, you know, cut the right-handed thread. So I'll do it in that order. The left-handed thread on the lead screw first, and then the right-handed thread. So if there's any mistakes or something doesn't work properly, then I can just get another bit of 16mm bar and try it again. So what I did there in the lathe is I made up this this test piece with the left-handed M16 thread in it, and that's so when I cut the threads into this lead screw, I'll be able to just test it out with this, make sure it all screws on properly and everything. So now the next step is to work on the lead screw, and I've marked out the bar, so I've got a kind of a center line. These first blue dots are kind of the center of where these holes are when this clamp is closed together. Now this is closed together further than what it would be once it's done, so what I want to know is how far down to make the threads so that you know, it's not going to bottom out while the jaw is still open. And then I've kind of open this up to, I think it's around about 6 inches. This is kind of a 5-inch clamp, but if If I go to 6 inches, then I know I've got enough travel in the threads. But the threads are going to go right to the end anyway, so that's not too much of a problem. The other thing I wanted to check was, do I have enough room at the ends here for the handle when it's open? So this is open a little bit further than what it would normally be for the 5-inch clamp, but yeah, I think there's enough room there. So the next step is then to put it in the lathe and try and cut these left-hand threads and see how that goes. Right, so that's the right-handed nut done, and it's in there, and it works absolutely perfect. So I'm going to start on the left-handed nut now for the other side. Right, we're getting close to getting finished here. So you saw that I made the nuts in here, the left hand nut and the right hand nut, and also just finished making the T handle here. So I've gone with just with the bar here, and this bar will be permanent, so it'll just stay in here. These ends, as you saw, screw on, so I can take it off if I need to take it off. So the clamp is pretty much assembled there. The last thing to do is the jaws here, so we'll work on that next. But in terms of you know how it works, it just works absolutely great. So just wind it in and wind it out. So what I did is I made it so it's like you know, a normal G or C clamp where you turn it to the right and it closes up. So that means the left hand thread is down this end and the right hand thread is up that end, instead of the other way around where it would be all kind of backwards and probably a bit awkward to use. So in terms of the jaws, I'll probably make some kind of square blocks in here and maybe put some kind of, you know, recess in them so that they can grip onto round stock and things like that. But to be honest, these jaws can be anything you want. They could be steel or aluminium jaws or brass jaws or, you know, any shapes that you want. And I think that's one of the benefits of these clamps, that you can just change it out the way you want it to suit the work that you're doing. But for this first clamp here, I'm just going to make some square steel blocks and mount those up in the jaws, and that should be all done. So just before we get into making the jaws for these clamps, I've got all the parts here, and I've made the all the parts for the second clamp as well off camera. So I'm going to first hot glue all of these parts, and then I will assemble the clamps, and then I'll be able to measure up and get the right size for the jaws that I need to make last. Okay, so we got both clamps all assembled here, and that's all worked out really well. So the next step was to make these jaws, and I initially did start cutting up a couple of pieces of square stock. This is 40mm by 40mm square, about 1.5 inch square. And I was going to use those as for the jaws in here. So one in there and one in here. Of course, you'd machine them all up. And then I thought I might actually make some soft jaws for it. So as you can see, I did some aluminium melting and casting on the weekend there, and I made these pieces here up. I made 3 of them just in case I have an issue, and I need to have an extra one. But basically I've cut them just a little bit off center, and that one will fit in there, and the wider one will fit in the bottom jaw here. So the next job will be to square all these blocks up and then get them to the width that I need to fit in here, you know, smoothly and with a bit of clearance there. Well, there they are. I've got the final parts on the clamps and they're all together and finished. I know this video's been quite a long video, but if you're still with us, thanks for holding out to the end here. So the clamps work absolutely beautifully. I've made these aluminium blocks here so that, you know, they don't mark your work that you're working on. They could have been made out of steel. So it's entirely up to, you know, the person who's making the clamps what they actually need them for. I've seen copper blocks being used, you know, when these are used for welding clamps. I've put some grooves in here, as you saw in the mill. So we got one that way and one that way on both of the jaws there. So that just helps you hold the round stock. Just sits in the groove there, nice and tight. Yeah, so that's that project finished. So I'm quite happy with those. They've come out really good and they are very, very strong. So turned out really well. Thanks for watching.